Missouri Extension. And I want to welcome you to our Forage and Livestock Town Hall that we've been doing weekly this year. We did this last year and continue this, and I want to welcome you again today. With me today is Tim Schnockenberg, who is serving, he's also a field specialist in agronomy in Stone County. Tim will be serving as our co-host, and I believe he has changed his name to Ask Questions Here. So you won't necessarily, oh, maybe not yet, but maybe you will. If you do want to ask questions, there's in the bottom center of your screen, you will see a button labeled chat. And if you click on that, there'll be a drop-down menu where you can choose either Tim's name or ask questions here, depending on whether he's changed that or not. In that case, only he will see your questions. You can also ask your questions of the entire group if you like. So we very much want to encourage you to ask questions because we feel like that enriches the learning process and deepens all of our understanding of the topic. For today, we will be featuring two presentations. First, a weather update from Dr. Pat Guinan, climatologist with the University of Missouri. And then we will have a presentation on steps for stockpiling fall fescue from Dr. Will McClain, who's a professor of agronomy at Missouri State University. Pat, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Sounds good. Thank you, Matt. And good afternoon, everyone. I'll get right into my report. Well, we did get some more rain across parts of Missouri since we last met a week ago, and most of that came actually towards the end of last week. But this is a radar map showing estimates of precipitation here in Missouri and the surrounding states over the past week. And southern parts of the state, actually, where things were actually getting a little bit dry in parts of southern Missouri. This yellow stripe you see here in southern Missouri is 2 or more inches of precipitation, and even embedded within that yellow stripe, we see higher totals approaching 3 to 4, even more than 5 inches of rain. And it was right in this area in southeast Missouri, around St. Genevieve County, Perry County, Bollinger County, St. Francis County, a little bit of northeastern Madison County, where they saw the biggest totals. And some of the rain gauge reports you can see here in this box, this table here, indeed over 7 inches from a reporter in St. Genevieve County. And then actually in southwest here, we had a report around Bolivar of over almost 6.5 inches. Far southwestern parts of the state, McDonald County, the community just west of Anderson, over 6 inches of rain. So some big rains. Lighter totals in the greens, a little bit more drying opportunity where it has been exceptionally wet across about the northern 2/3 of the state, especially northwest parts of central Missouri. It's nice to get a little bit more dryness because there were double-digit rainfall totals over the past few weeks, impacting much of northern and parts of central Missouri. The topsoil moisture conditions really do still reflect the wetness here in Missouri. The top map shows this is topsoil moisture, so about the top 6 inches of the soil profile, showing 20% of the state. As of a few days ago, 20% of Missouri still showing surplus topsoil moisture conditions, but again, because of the antecedent rainfall we've seen across much of Missouri. And then the bottom here, you can see this is the percent of this here in Missouri where the topsoil is short to very short, only 2%. That's quite unusual to see this deep into the month of July, where typically, things are drying out and things are really hot. Fortunately, we've actually been fairly cool for July, running about 1 to 3 degrees below normal. But I will say over the next several days, things are going to really make up for that departure because things are going to be getting hot. It is interesting to note, of course, how dry it is, not to our neighbors to our north and west. Even Arkansas is somewhat dry, but very dry conditions, of course, with the severe drought impacting much of the western half of the country, especially the northern plains and much of the western states. Well, it's been a little smoky too. And, the smoke that all the wildfires we've heard about, of course, with the drought and lack of rainfall across much of the western half of the country, that extends up into the Canadian provinces. And so we're seeing all these wildfires that are putting out a lot of smoke. And the way the upper air pattern is, we have a ridge of high pressure in the middle part of the country. Those steering winds are taking that smoke and blowing it from the west here north into Canada, and then it's taken a dive into the Midwest down into the Missouri. We're seeing the smoke with these colorful sunrises and sunsets. Fortunately, the particulates have been more at the mid and upper levels here in Missouri, so we're not really seeing respiratory impacts because of that. But I will say some parts of the country, Indiana, look how the deeper the reds are, the higher the concentration of the particulates, and some have made it down to the surface. And so they are having some air quality issues here to our east, our neighbors to the east in Indiana and parts of Tennessee. But nonetheless, those wildfires, they impact our weather too. And we're definitely seeing that with the very hazy conditions. And I don't really see that going away anytime soon. I think the big story will be the heat and the humidity. We're really going to be just getting more warmer over the next few days into the weekend and through much of next week. This is a pattern that's going to stick around. That ridge of high pressure that's been impacting the western half of the country for much of the summer is it's becoming a little bit more robust and strengthening and expanding eastward. And so that heat and the Gulf of Mexico will be open with more southerly winds, bringing in more humidity. We're going to have some really high temperatures in combination with high humidity is going to create some very uncomfortable conditions as we go into tomorrow, the weekend, and through much of next week. Already, you can see here in the upper right around the Kansas City area, they have issued an excessive heat watch for consecutive days of heat indices of 100 degrees or higher. Of course, be aware of these conditions and how impactful they can be, not only on ourselves, but on livestock, on our pets. It's going to be very uncomfortable over the next few days, but we are in the dog days this summer. I talked about that smog and smoke. This gray area in Indiana is indicative of the poor air quality that they're seeing that does have impacts on especially the elderly and children when it comes to the particulates that can have impacts on our health. So please be aware of that situation as well. That's been emerging. So the heat is on, the humidity is going up, and our chances for precipitation are not going to be as frequent as we've seen over the past several weeks with these prior wet conditions. I will say it's nice to have a little bit of reserve of soil moisture in the soil profile, because that will be tapped into probably as we start to see these evaporation rates go up with these higher temperatures, creating perhaps some more stress, high heat indices. It's with this efficient evaporation taking place that actually will keep those high temperatures from getting too much out of control. But of course, if this dry spell continues over the next several days, we could see some really high temperatures. They're already indicating much of the Central Plains by next week could see a lot of triple-digit heat, well into the hundreds across the Central and Southern Plains. So that's something to keep an eye on as we go into the month of August to see whether this ridge is going to stick around and perhaps impact our weather here. There are indications, I will say, looking at this map over the next 5 days of precipitation, there is a little bit of instability across Texas for today and tomorrow. That actually could reach up into southern parts of the state. There's maybe 20% chances of afternoon showers and thunderstorms for today and tomorrow across southern Missouri. Most folks will miss out on any of those precipitation. It won't be widespread, but there could be some scattered showers and thunderstorms across southern Missouri. And some of the forecast models are indicating as we go into Sunday night and Monday, they're indicating there might be a little bit of a disturbance riding along the periphery of that ridge that could trigger a complex of thunderstorms to fire up, perhaps in Nebraska, western Iowa, and move southeastward into Missouri. So our best chances of rainfall, at least widespread rainfall, could come on Sunday night and on into Monday. So something to keep an eye on. And but that's pretty much it, I think, in regard to widespread chances. It does look like that ridge is going to build even further into Missouri as we go into the middle and latter part of next week. And this is the forecast that really indicates that. On the left, this is the 6 to 10 day outlook that'll take us from July 27th to the end of the month. These enhanced areas of red indicate a higher likelihood. There's strong confidence that above normal temperatures will be impacting much of the middle part of the country. That's just a terrible thing to see, considering the severe to extreme drought that we're seeing in the central and especially the northern plains. It looks like these really high temperatures are going to stick around. Here in Missouri, this is our climatologically our hottest time of year, with generally highs in the upper 80s, lows in the upper 60s. I would say it's safe to say well into the 90s, perhaps, for much of next week, according to this forecast, for high temperatures, and lows only getting down into the 70s. On the right, the browns are indicative here of an enhanced likelihood of below normal precipitation. So it does look like that ridge of high pressure that's been impacting much of the western half of the country is going to build in our area and continue to bring us these higher temperatures. And looks like not much of a likelihood of any precipitation or significant precipitation, with that only exception perhaps being Sunday night into Monday. So, Matt, that's pretty much a weather report. I'll hand it back over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Pat. Tim, do we have any questions for Pat?
Nothing at this time, Matt.
Very good. Our featured topic today is stockpiling tall fescue. And with us today is Dr. Will McClain. Will is a professor in plant science at Missouri State University. And prior to his position there, he worked for University of Missouri Extension as a agronomy specialist in the east central part of Missouri. We want to welcome Will, and Will, I'll just turn it over to you.
Thanks, Matt. Oh. Did I do it right the first time?
Looks real good.
All right. Well, thanks for having me. I will say, of all the talks I did when I was with Extension, number one was how to pull a soil sample and understanding the soil test report. And number two was stockpiling tall fescue. And I told Matt and Tim earlier that one of the nice things about lecturing digitally like I have this way over the last year has been I just assume all of my jokes are just, I'm knocking them right out of the park. So if you combine the past and the future, what you get is pasture. It's one of my all-time favorite forage jokes. And I'm just going to assume everybody's laughing. Okay, stockpiling. Well, traditionally, this is a growth curve for tall fescue, and most of these stockpiling slides I got from Rob a long time ago, and I've made good use of them, especially this one. So traditionally, fescue has a growth curve in the spring and in the fall. We bale that excess, we graze, and then we feed that back in the winter months. Stockpiling is just deferring that grazing, allowing that forage to accumulate over the fall. We don't graze pretty much from now until the end of the growing season, let it accumulate, and then graze it back. So you're letting the animal harvest it instead of us spending time harvest and money. So one of the thing I think about lecturing about fescue is I may pause here or there because of my internet connection. It just said it was unstable. As we're going into late summer and fall, temperatures are going down. That lowers respiration. So fescue will accumulate or increase the amount of non-structural carbohydrates. So it makes it good quality feed. It's also vegetative growth. You don't have the stems and seed heads that you have in the spring. So it is good quality. Usually you can plan on about 1 to 2 tons per acre by the end of the growing season. And I use 1 acre per cow average. Now, I don't think I'm out of practice. It's been a while. Hay is expensive. I don't think I'm breaking any news here. Everybody knows it's expensive to make it, to transport it, to store it, feeding it back. All of that is expensive. I and I'm no economist. I'm not an ag economist, so I don't usually talk about money as much. And this is an older slide. I know these estimates are several years old, but if you change the price of fuel, equipment, fertilizer, the difference would still be the same. It's going to be half or 2/3 as much more to produce, cost as much to produce hay as it would be to stockpile. So it is really, and it's the one thing that tall fescue is really good at. It withstands the winter months. I hope there's not any taxonomists or agristologists in the audience, because I'm sure I'll offend somebody. I learned it as Festuca rundinaceae, but it's changed to Lolium. And now I'm not even going to try to butcher the whatever it is now. And I don't care what you call it. You could call it Doug or Steve. I'm more concerned with how I use it and how the plant grows. So it's a cool season C3 perennial bunch grass. It does have rhizomes, although there are some sources out there that say it doesn't. I've dug enough fescue up to know that it does have rhizomes. It is well suited to what we call the fescue belt. Now this map comes from Oregon State's tall fescue monograph. I will have to say I did alter it by putting a little red blob up there for the Willamette Valley, because they do grow a lot of tall fescue. Also, the life cycle of fescue. It is a long-lived perennial. It reproduces from vegetative growth as well as seeds every year, and it will tolerate soil acidity, poor fertility, poor drainage, flooding, drought, heat, cold. It'll pretty much tolerate anything, and a large part of that is due to its relationship with the endophytic fungus. The Alliance, and I'll put a quick plug in for the Alliance workshops. If you haven't been there, it's a wealth of information, and you get the experts from across the country. So I know we have a flyer that'll be coming out pretty soon for a virtual one like this for extension, and then we'll have the regular schools in the spring. So the endophyte is important to pay attention to, because it will, we know that it will build up a lot of ergot alkaloids or ergovaline in the spring. Well, it'll also do it in the fall. With that second peak of growth, you also get an increase. One of my favorite slides from the Alliance is this, because it allows you to visualize where that endophyte is at. Most of its life, well, first of all, its entire life is within the plant. So most of it is spent down in the crown of the plant. And then when fescue goes reproductive, you also find it up in the stems and seed heads. While it does increase ergovaline going into the fall, that is going to be concentrated lower in the plant. So with good grazing management, you can avoid that. Also, and really, I should also point out that not just our state, but Georgia and South Carolina also see that peak going into the fall. It does drop off as we get through the winter, which fits nicely with stockpiling. One of the big, I think, misconceptions about stockpiling is how much dry matter it will lose over the period. It will lose some, but it isn't much. That waxy cuticle on the leaf of tall fescue allows it to stand up well throughout the winter. So you don't really lose a lot of dry matter. It maintains good quality. It's typically better than most hay. And as we progress through the winter months, that amount of ergovaline will go down. So tall fescue is probably the perfect species of grass for stockpiling. You get a lot of growth in the fall. It's vegetative. It maintains that yield and quality. It does well, throughout Missouri. We get that rapid growth from September to November. I will say we've had several dry falls in the past 5 to 7 years. And so this year will be a great year, I believe, for stockpiling, at least right now. Like Pat said, we have some residual moisture. I was pulling soil samples week before last and a few last week, and we still have moisture in our soils. In northern Greene County, where I live, I was a little over that. I had 3.5 inches in that time. So we're looking at probably stockpiling quite a few of our pastures this fall. Picking the right field is always a question. You really don't want abused ones. You don't want lots of weeds. You don't want abused and overused won't be the best fields for stockpiling. And really, when it comes to fertilizing, I'll have the recipe in a minute, and it's 40 to 80 pounds of nitrogen. But I would argue that if we're stockpiling pastures, that fertility doesn't need to be as high on a pasture because the animals are recycling all of those nutrients. We're not cutting and removing them. And so that nitrogen is, I usually don't use any, and if I do, it's a very small amount. I think 2 years ago, I used 35 pounds of nitrogen to the acre. So picking the right field is important. And here's the phosphorus and potassium requirements. 45 is 40 to 45, depending on which index you're looking at in the soil fertility manual, is about perfect at that range between medium and high. And I've seen a lot of pastures in the 15 and 20 pounds that have stockpiled really well. If you have a 1 to 2% organic matter, you're probably going to get 25 to 50 pounds of nitrogen from a breakdown of organic matter. And that's going to come in the fall, right? That's going to be from activity that happened throughout the growing season. So you're often getting a little shot of nitrogen anyway. So I wouldn't spend a lot of money on fertilizer if I was stockpiling, especially on a poor field. You can't fertilize your way out of some of those problems. pH wise, Fescue will do great in 5.5 pH. So lime is often usually the thing that would benefit quite a bit. Here's a couple of pictures of what it would look like. This is up at FSRC. This was one of Rob's students, her graduate research. The top left is December, then January, and even in February, you can start to see the fescue will grow. It's one interesting thing about fescue. We might gain quite a bit of tonnage in December and January. It's not at the same rate as it is in the peak, but we could have days in December where we're putting on 35 to maybe even as much as 50 pounds per acre. The overall recipe, start with, like I said, 1 acre per cow. That's about 75 to 90 days of feed supply. You want to make sure that the area you're going to stockpile has been either clipped or grazed to about 3 inches in August. Usually I'm shooting for early August. And then if I am going to put on some nitrogen, it's usually a small amount, and I try to time it. We've had some August and Septembers where the temperature is really high and we haven't had moisture, and urea was what I had available. And so I probably lost quite a bit of that 35 or 40 pounds of nitrogen that I actually put on. So nitrogen's one that also, more nitrogen will increase the ergovaline from the endophyte. So if I'm just stockpiling pastures, really what I'm doing a lot of times is just setting them aside and letting them rest. I don't always pour a bunch of fertilizer to it. I tend to save that for my hay fields where I need the production. Then defer that grazing until, Christmas is or New Year's is a great time to shoot for. Sometimes with these last few years, when we didn't get the growth in the fall that I was hoping for, we would actually started grazing after Thanksgiving. And then if you strip graze, you can really increase that utilization. As long as you've got somebody that will go move that polywire every day or every other day. So I don't know how I did on time, Matt, but with that, I'd be happy to take any questions or comments or threats.
Well, thank you, Will, for that presentation. Tim, I will turn to you to see what kind of questions we may have had come in.
Yeah, we had a couple of questions. The one question was on the nitrogen rates between maybe a Kentucky 31 with, endophyte versus novel fields. Do you have any thoughts on that, Will?
Would you say that again, Tim? I'm sorry.
Well, the question was, should the nitrogen rates be different between Kentucky 31 fields versus novel fields?
Well, that's a good question, by the way. With novel, you wouldn't have to worry about the toxic ergot alkaloids. So and this is my personal preference, but I've always thought that the novels really fit well in a hay situation because I can control the management. And then if I am cutting it late or putting a lot of nitrogen to it, I don't have to worry as much. So if I was doing that, I would put that on some of my better ground and I wouldn't hesitate to put nitrogen to it.
Sounds good. Thank you, Will. We've had one more question come in, and that is, should you worry about overgrazing a field, let's say in January? Would that be an issue if you grazed it pretty hard?
Yes. I mean, sometimes I think when I talk sounds like fescue's indestructible, but it's not. If you grazed it really hard and we had some really, really cold temperatures, especially if it was dry, you would lose some of it. I know it's sometimes difficult to stop them when you're running out of grass and switch over to feeding hay or something. But in the long run, I guess that's the difference between the animal scientists and the plant scientists. I'm more concerned about my grass. So I would tend to baby it a little bit. I think I wouldn't overgraze it. I like to use a back fence when I strip graze. That works if you can move your water or you create what I do is just a lane down one side to get to the water. But I typically put a back fence up to stop them from overgrazing areas. I hope that answered the question.
Yes, I think that addressed it. Matt, right now, I don't have any other questions that have come in.
Okay. Craig, did you want to say something?
Yeah, you're talking about the question on novels and nitrogen rate. Yeah, I agree with Will. The beauty of novels is you can hit that field with whatever you want. If John Laurie were on the call today, John would be recommending 60 to 80 pounds of nitrogen any time of the year. You can hit that field with as much as you want if it's a novel, and you just get yield and yield and yield. It's very high quality in the fall. And so I would just say 80 pounds in the fall. If we have the rainfall, will give you a lot of very high quality forage. If you do that with Kentucky 31, as Will said, you're going to have all kinds of toxin problems, probably fescue foot or something like that in the winter. So that's all that I would add.
Okay. Thanks, Greg. And Will, we very much appreciate you joining us today and providing the presentation on stockpiling tall fescue.
Thanks for having me.
Folks, just to let you know that the presentations today, that the town hall is recorded, and it's actually it's live. Some will be participating in this town hall by viewing the town hall live on YouTube. And as I said, the town hall is recorded, and those recordings are made available to those who would like to view them later on our YouTube channel. You can see the address for that YouTube channel. It's the MUIPM YouTube channel. And on this slide, I've got 5 or 6 examples of previous town halls and those topics. And we're finding that a number of people appreciate the opportunity to view them later. So certainly if you miss a town hall, you can catch it a little bit later if you like. Just to share with you the town halls that are coming up in August. Actually next week, I should say next week, we'll be featuring soil fertility considerations in the fall. Then in August, you can see we'll have Dr. John Jennings, also a previous regional agronomist. We'll be talking about cool season forage variety and establishment. We're working on a speaker for August 12th to address winter annual establishment and management. August 19th, Dr. Mary Dranowski from the University of Nebraska will be talking about grazing cover crops with beef cattle. And finally, in August 26th, Dr. Eric Bailey with MU Extension will be presenting information on rations for background in calves this year. Tim, I might turn to you one final time to see if there's any additional questions that have come in before we close today.
No, Matt, I haven't seen any more at this point.
Okay. Very good. Thank you, Tim. We very much appreciate you participating in our town hall and hope you can join us next week or in future weeks. And that's all we have for today.